At my nephew's graduation, my sister handed me a trash bag and said, "Make yourself useful for once." I'd quietly paid his tuition for 4 years, $67,000 total. Nobody knew. So I smiled, took out my phone, and showed her the transfer receipts. Her face went white. Then I forwarded them to the family group chat with one message: "You're welcome." Within minutes, my phone exploded. I, 42M, stood in the parking lot of the university stadium, watching families stream toward the graduation venue in their Sunday best. The June sun beat down on my neck, and I loosened my tie slightly, checking my watch. I was early, as usual. Being punctual was one of those habits my father had drilled into me, back when he still acknowledged my existence. My phone buzzed. A message in the family group chat from my sister, asking if anyone had seen the good camera. I didn't respond. I rarely did. The chat was mostly my sister coordinating family events, my mother sharing prayer requests, and my brother posting photos of his kids. I was the ghost member, present but invisible. I walked toward the stadium, following the crowd. My nephew was graduating today with a degree in mechanical engineering. For years ago, he'd gotten accepted to this prestigious university, and the family had celebrated with a backyard barbecue. I remembered sitting at the picnic table, watching everyone toast to his future, while my sister complained loudly about the cost of tuition. She'd gone on and on about how they'd have to take out loans, how the interest rates were criminal, how unfair it was that education cost so much. I'd excused myself early that night, claiming I had work in the morning. Nobody seemed to notice when I left. What they didn't know was that I'd contacted the university's financial office the following Monday. I'd set up an anonymous payment plan, routing the money through a trust account. Every semester for 4 years, I'd transferred the tuition directly. $67,000 total. My sister and her husband never received a single tuition bill. The university had been instructed to mark the account as fully paid by an anonymous donor. I'd done it because my nephew was a good kid. Smart, hardworking, kind. He deserved the opportunity. But I'd also done it because I knew how the family operated. If I told them I was paying, my sister would have found a way to take credit. My mother would have praised her for raising such a blessed child. My brother would have made some joke about me finally contributing to the family. And my father would have said nothing, which somehow hurt worse than anything. So I'd stayed silent. I'd watched from the periphery as my sister posted about her son's academic achievements, about the sacrifices they were making, about how proud she was that they were managing despite the financial burden. I'd liked the posts. Never commented. I found my family near the entrance. My mother saw me first and waved. She looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray than brown now. My brother stood beside her, his arm around his wife. My sister was near the doors, directing her husband and younger kids like a general commanding troops. I approached, and my mother hugged me briefly. She asked if I'd had trouble finding parking, and I told her I'd arrived early. My brother clapped me on the shoulder and made some comment about me looking tired. I probably did. I'd been working 60-hour weeks for the past month on a project deadline. My sister finally noticed me. She was holding several shopping bags and looked stressed. She barely glanced my way before thrusting a large trash bag into my hands. She told me to make myself useful for once. The bag was filled with empty water bottles and snack wrappers from their hotel room. She said they needed to get inside for good seats and didn't have time to deal with trash. I stood there, holding the bag, while my family moved past me toward the entrance. My mother was already inside. My brother was laughing at something his wife had said. My sister's husband was carrying their youngest on his shoulders. Nobody looked back. I stared at the trash bag. 4 years of tuition payments. $67,000. Anonymous sacrifices. And I was the family errand boy, useful only for taking out the garbage. Something in me shifted. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to help this family quietly, without recognition, without thanks. I'd convinced myself that it didn't matter if they knew, that doing good things in secret was somehow more noble. But standing there in that parking lot, holding a bag of trash like the family servant, I realized I was done. I pulled out my phone. I'd kept every receipt, every confirmation email, every transfer record. I told myself it was for tax purposes, but maybe some part of me had always known this moment would come. I found my sister near the entrance, directing foot traffic like she owned the place. I walked up to her and handed back the trash bag. She looked annoyed, asking what I was doing, telling me to just throw it away. I told her I wanted to show her something first. I pulled up my banking app and navigated to my transfer history. 4 years of payments. Each one labeled with my nephew's student ID number and the university's name. The dates aligned perfectly with each semester. The amounts varied slightly but totaled exactly $67,000 for $100. I held the phone out to her. She looked confused at first, squinting at the screen. Then her expression changed. Her eyebrows drew together. Her mouth opened slightly. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. She asked me what this was. I told her it was every tuition payment for her son's education. All 4 years. Every semester. She and her husband had never received a single bill because I'd paid them all anonymously through a trust account. She stared at me. Her hand came up to her mouth. She started to say something, stopped, started again. She wanted to know if I was joking. I asked her if I looked like I was joking. My brother-in-law appeared beside her, asking what was wrong. She showed him the phone, her hand shaking. He went pale too. He looked at me, then back at the phone, then at me again. My sister's voice came out hoarse. She asked why I'd never told them. I looked at the trash bag she was still holding, then back at her. I told her it seemed like she had a pretty clear opinion of how useful I was to this family. Then I did something I'd been wanting to do for years. I opened the family group chat. All 12 members. My parents, my siblings, their spouses, my adult cousins. I attached screenshots of the transfer receipts for years' worth. And I typed 2 words. You're welcome. I hit send. My sister's phone buzzed. So did my brother-in-law's. I could hear other phones going off inside the stadium entrance. My sister looked down at her phone, then back up at me, her eyes wide with panic. She started saying wait, asking me to delete it, but I was already walking away. I found a trash can and threw away her garbage myself. Then I headed toward the stadium entrance. My phone started exploding. Calls, texts, messages in the group chat. I silenced it and kept walking. Inside the stadium, I found a seat in the middle section, away from my family. I could see them gathered near the front, phones out, my sister talking urgently to my mother. My father stood apart from them, staring at his phone screen. The graduation ceremony started. I watched my nephew walk across the stage, shake hands with the dean, receive his diploma. He looked happy, accomplished. That was what mattered. My phone kept buzzing. I glanced at it during the ceremony. The family chat had exploded into chaos. My mother was asking if this was real. My brother said he couldn't believe I'd paid that much without telling anyone. My father's message was short, just asking why I'd kept it secret. My cousins were chiming in, some saying I should have told the family, others defending me. My sister had sent me several private messages. The first few were apologetic, saying she didn't know, that she never would have said what she said if she'd known. The later ones turned angry, asking why I'd embarrassed her in front of the whole family, telling me this was a private matter that didn't need to be broadcast. I didn't respond to any of them. After the ceremony ended, I waited until the crowd thinned before heading toward the exit. I wanted to avoid the family confrontation I knew was coming. But my mother found me near the parking lot. She looked upset, her eyes red. She asked me why I'd never told them about the payments. I asked her how many times over the past 4 years she'd asked about my life. How many times she'd called just to check in, not because she needed something or wanted to share family news, but just to talk to me. She went quiet. I told her I'd paid for my nephew's education because he deserved it, not because I wanted recognition. But I was tired of being invisible until someone needed something. Tired of being the family afterthought. Tired of being treated like I didn't matter unless I was useful in some immediate, tangible way. She said she didn't realize I felt that way. She insisted we loved me, that we were family. I told her love wasn't just a word you said. It was something you showed. And for years, the family had shown me exactly where I stood. My father appeared then. He looked uncomfortable, his hands in his pockets. He said we should talk about this later, not in a parking lot on my nephew's special day. I told him there was nothing to talk about. I'd done what I wanted to do. The family knew now. That was enough. My nephew found me as I was unlocking my car. He looked overwhelmed, his graduation gown slung over his arm. He said my sister had told him everything, and he wanted to thank me. I told him he'd earned his degree through his own hard work. The money was just money. What he did with his education was what mattered. He said it wasn't just money to him. It was freedom from debt, from stress. It was the ability to start his career without a financial anchor around his neck. He wanted to know how he could repay me. I told him to be successful, to be kind, To remember that helping others didn't always mean broadcasting it. He hugged me. It was probably the first real hug I'd received from anyone in the family in years. I drove home, my phone still buzzing periodically. I didn't check it. When I got to my apartment, I poured myself a drink and sat on my balcony, watching the sunset. Update 1. The fallout was immediate and messy. Over the next week, I received dozens of calls and messages. Most I ignored. The ones I did read painted an interesting picture of my family's true dynamics. My sister called me repeatedly, alternating between apologetic and angry. In her calmer messages, she thanked me profusely and apologized for her behavior. In her angrier ones, she accused me of deliberately humiliating her, of choosing the worst possible moment to reveal my payments, of making her look ungrateful in front of everyone. I finally responded to one message, telling her she'd made herself look ungrateful without any help from me. My brother took a different approach. He called asking if I was planning to help fund his kids' education too, since I apparently had money to throw around. He framed it as a joke, but I could hear the seriousness underneath. I told him I'd think about it, which was a polite way of saying no. My mother tried to mediate. She invited me to Sunday dinner, saying the family needed to discuss things properly. I declined. She kept insisting, telling me I was being stubborn, that family was supposed to work through conflicts together. I reminded her that family was also supposed to appreciate each other, not hand each other trash bags at graduation ceremonies. My father sent one text. He said he was proud of what I'd done for my nephew, and that he'd like to talk sometime. It was the first time he'd expressed pride in me in over a decade. I didn't know what to do with that. The extended family's reaction was split. Some cousins reached out to say they understood my frustration and supported my decision to go public. Others thought I'd been petty and vindictive, that I should have handled it privately. My nephew called me regularly. He wanted to take me to dinner, to introduce me to his girlfriend, to include me in his life in ways the rest of the family never had. It was strange and touching and made me realize how much I'd missed having genuine connections with my relatives. About 2 weeks after the graduation, my sister showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She asked if we could talk. I let her in, though I wasn't sure why. She sat on my couch and immediately started crying. She apologized again, said she'd been stressed about the graduation, about money, about 100 other things, and she'd taken it out on me unfairly. She insisted she'd never meant to make me feel unappreciated. I asked her if she could name 3 things I'd done for the family in the past year, besides paying for her son's education. She went quiet, thinking. She couldn't. I told her that was the problem. I'd become invisible unless I was needed for something specific. I'd fixed my brother's car twice. I'd helped my mother move apartments. I'd covered the cost of my father's medication when his insurance lapsed. I'd done all of it quietly, without complaint, because that's what family did. But nobody noticed. Nobody remembered. Until they needed something again. My sister admitted she'd been self-absorbed. She said raising kids and managing a household had consumed her, and she'd stopped paying attention to anyone else's needs. She promised to do better. I told her I'd believe it when I saw it. She asked if I regretted paying for my nephew's education. I told her no. I'd do it again. But I regretted letting the family treat me like I didn't matter. That part was on me. I'd trained them to take me for granted by never setting boundaries. She left shortly after, promising to stay in touch. I didn't hold my breath. Update 2. A month after the graduation, things began to shift in unexpected ways. My nephew landed a job at a top engineering firm. At his celebration dinner, which he specifically invited me to, he gave a toast. He thanked his parents for their support, his professors for their guidance, and then he turned to me. He told the entire restaurant about what I'd done, how I'd paid his tuition anonymously for 4 years, how I'd never asked for recognition or repayment, how I'd given him a debt-free start to his career. My sister and her husband were there. So was my mother. They all sat quietly while my nephew spoke. When he finished, the restaurant applauded. My sister was crying again, but this time it seemed genuine. After dinner, my father pulled me aside. We'd barely spoken since the graduation. He told me he'd been thinking about the past few years, about how he'd treated me after I'd chosen a different career path than he'd wanted for me. He'd been disappointed when I'd left the family business to pursue software engineering, and he'd let that disappointment color everything. He said he'd been wrong, that I'd built a successful life on my own terms, and he should have been proud instead of distant. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Years of resentment didn't disappear with one conversation, but it was a start. My brother never apologized for asking me to fund his kids' education, but he did start inviting me to his children's school events and birthday parties. Small gestures, but more than he'd offered in years. My sister kept her promise to stay in touch. She called weekly, asked about my work, invited me to family dinners. Sometimes I went. Sometimes I didn't. I was learning that I didn't owe anyone my presence just because we shared DNA. The biggest change was in how I saw myself. For years, I'd equated my value with what I could provide. I'd believed that if I was just helpful enough, generous enough, quiet enough, the family would eventually see me. But that parking lot moment, holding that trash bag, had crystallized something important. I didn't need them to see me. I needed to see myself, to recognize my own worth independent of their acknowledgement. I started setting boundaries. When my brother asked me to help him move, I said no. I was busy that weekend. When my mother tried to guilt me into attending a family event I didn't want to go to, I declined without explanation. When my sister asked me to lend her money, I told her I'd think about it, and then I actually thought about it instead of automatically saying yes. Some of them didn't like the new boundaries. My mother especially struggled with it. She was used to managing the family's dynamics, and my independence disrupted her system. But that wasn't my problem to fix. My nephew and I grew closer. He became the family connection I'd been craving, someone who valued me for who I was rather than what I provided. We started meeting for lunch regularly. He introduced me to his girlfriend, who was sharp and funny and exactly the kind of person I'd want him with. They talked about their future, their careers, their dreams, and they asked about mine too. It was refreshing to have someone actually interested in my life. 6 months after the graduation, my nephew got engaged. He called me before he told anyone else in the family. He said he and his fiancée wanted me to be part of the wedding party, that I'd made his education and therefore his career and therefore his ability to propose possible. I told him he'd made all of that possible himself, but I'd be honored to stand with him. The family dynamics remained complicated. My sister and I had reached a careful peace, cordial but not close. My brother and I were friendly but distant. My mother kept trying to pull me back into the old patterns, and I kept resisting. My father and I talked occasionally, slowly rebuilding something that might eventually resemble a relationship. But I'd stopped waiting for them to change. I'd stopped hoping for some moment of collective realization where they'd all suddenly appreciate me. That wasn't how families worked. Instead, I focused on building the life I wanted. I took the promotion at work I'd been hesitating about. I started dating someone I'd met through friends, someone who had no connection to my family drama. I planned a trip to Japan, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off because family obligations always seemed more important. The trash bag incident had been humiliating in the moment, but looking back, it was the catalyst I'd needed. Sometimes you had to hit rock bottom with people before you could rebuild on your own terms. I never regretted paying my nephew's tuition. That money had changed his life in tangible ways. But the real gift hadn't been the education. It had been learning that I could help someone without sacrificing my own dignity. That generosity didn't require self-erasure. And if the family wanted me in their lives now, they'd have to meet me as an equal, not as the invisible useful one. Some days they managed it. Some days they didn't. But either way, I was finally okay. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too.